"Ticket, please." The flight attendant's voice was sharp, professional on the surface, but her eyes carried something else. The young boy, no older than 10, held out his boarding pass with trembling hands. His sneakers squeaked against the polished floor of the jet bridge as he stepped into the cabin. For him, this flight was supposed to be exciting, his very first trip alone. But the moment he crossed the threshold, everything changed. The attendant's painted smile cracked. Her lips curled upward, but not with warmth. Instead, a stifled chuckle escaped her throat. She tilted her head, looking him up and down as if he were out of place. And then, it happened. A quick laugh, sharp and mocking, slicing through the hum of boarding passengers. The boy froze. His dark eyes widened, searching the faces around him for some sign that he'd misheard. But he hadn't. A couple of passengers glanced over, curious, but then quickly looked away. The attendant leaned toward another crew member, whispering something behind her hand, and the two of them shared a grin. The boy's chest tightened. Why were they laughing? Was it his worn backpack? His too big jacket? Or was it simply him? He shuffled down the aisle, clutching his bag tighter. His seat number blurred in his vision as tears threatened to form. Around him the world seemed normal. People stowing luggage, adjusting seat belts, scrolling on phones. But to him, the sound of that laugh echoed louder than the engines outside. "Excuse me, son," an older man murmured from the aisle seat, pulling his bag closer to give the boy space. The child nodded, slipping into the window seat, his small frame nearly swallowed by the chair. He pressed his forehead against the glass, hiding his face. The laughter replayed in his mind over and over. He imagined passengers still whispering, still judging. His stomach churned with shame. He wanted it to disappear, to shrink until nobody could see him. The intercom crackled. The same attendant's voice filled the cabin now, calm and controlled. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard." But to the boy, every syllable felt poisoned. That laugh had already spoken louder than any welcome ever could. He squeezed his fists and took a shaky breath. He couldn't understand why, but something deep inside told him this moment wasn't over. That laugh would come back to haunt her. And as the engines roared to life and the plane prepared for takeoff, the boy blinked back tears. He didn't know it yet, but what began with humiliation would soon lead to a revelation that no one on that plane could forget. And it all started with a laugh. The moment he sat down, the silence wasn't real anymore. It was filled with something sharper, whispers. A voice from across the aisle. "Did you hear her laugh?" Another leaned in, not even bothering to lower their tone. "She really did. At that kid." The boy could feel it. Not in their words, but in the weight of their stares. Quick glances, darting eyes, then heads turning away, as if they hadn't looked at all. Every time he shifted in his seat, he imagined their judgment following him like shadows. The attendant walked down the aisle again, smile now rehearsed and mechanical. She avoided his gaze, but the damage had already been done. People had noticed, and people were talking. He pressed himself against the window, trying to vanish into the glass. His reflection stared back at him, small and unsure. "Why me?" he thought. "Why do they all have to look?" Behind him, a young woman whispered to her seatmate, "Poor kid. But maybe he's overreacting." Her words stabbed deeper than the laughter itself. Because wasn't that what people always said? That it wasn't a big deal, that he was too sensitive. He swallowed hard, wishing someone, anyone, would indeed stand up for him, but no one did. Some passengers shook their heads in disapproval at the attendant, but no one spoke aloud. Their silence felt like agreement. "Excuse me, miss," an older lady called to the attendant. "Could I have some water?" The boy's heart leapt. Was this his defender? But no. The request was polite, ordinary. Life continued, as if nothing had happened at all. He lowered his gaze to his lap, his small hands clutching the fabric of his backpack. Inside, he had packed his favorite book, a snack his father gave him, and a phone he was barely allowed to use. Suddenly, that phone felt like the only lifeline he had left. The murmurs swirled around him like smoke, impossible to escape. Every word he caught made him sink further into his seat. He thought about speaking up, but the fear of more laughter sealed his lips shut. He wasn't just a boy on a plane anymore. He was the center of a silent courtroom, every passenger a juror, and his only crime was existing where he wasn't wanted. And though he didn't know it yet, the silence in that cabin was pushing him toward a breaking point, one that would force him to reach for the only person who could make it stop. At first he tried to hold it in. He clenched his jaw, forced his eyes to stay dry, and pressed his forehead against the cold window. But the pressure inside was too heavy. One blink, and the tears slipped free. A single drop slid down his cheek, hidden by the hum of the engines and the shuffle of seatbelts clicking into place. He hoped no one noticed. He prayed the whispers had moved on, but in his heart, the sting remained. His mind betrayed him, pulling him backward, into memories he wished he could erase. A classroom. The sound of kids laughing as he read aloud, his voice cracking with nerves. "Why do you sound like that?" they mocked. His teacher's silence had felt just like today, permission for the cruelty to continue. A playground. Running to join a group in a game of tag, only to hear one boy sneer, "You don't belong here." The rejection had burned, the same way the flight attendant's laugh burned now. Each flashback stacked on the last, building a wall of shame inside him. And now, trapped in this narrow seat 30,000 feet in the air, there was nowhere to run. He covered his face with his sleeve, hoping to hide the tremble in his lips. His chest rose and fell in uneven breaths, his small shoulders shaking with the effort of staying quiet. The older man beside him noticed. He shifted, as if he wanted to say something, but then stopped. The boy caught the movement out of the corner of his eye, and for a split second he thought, maybe this stranger would help. But no words came, just another silence. Why won't anyone ever stand up, the boy thought. Why is it always me, alone? He sank deeper into his seat. The sound of his muffled sobs drowned beneath the captain's announcement. The world went on, indifferent, while he drowned in his own hurt. But in the middle of his pain, his hand drifted to his backpack. His fingers brushed against the cool edge of the phone his father had given him. "Only call me if you really need me," Papa had said with a smile. The boy's tears slowed. His chest still ached, but a spark of thought lit in his mind. Maybe this was that moment. Maybe this time he didn't have to face it alone. And as the plane climbed higher into the clouds, he knew his next decision would change everything. The boy's fingers trembled as he pulled the phone from his backpack. His sleeve was still damp from wiping away tears, and his chest rose in shallow, uneven breaths. For a moment, he hesitated. His father's words echoed in his head. "Only call me if you really need me." But this time, he needed him. He pressed the button, the soft glow of the screen lighting up his face in the dim cabin. The ringtone buzzed in his ear, each tone pounding against his fear. Finally, a deep, steady voice sang, "Jared." "Hello, son?" The boy's lips quivered. He tried to speak, but the words tangled in his throat. Passengers nearby glanced over at the sound, curiosity sparking in their eyes. "Papa." His voice cracked, barely above a whisper. "She laughed at me." There was silence on the other end. Heavy, deliberate silence. Then his father's calm tone came through. Measured. Strong. "Tell me what happened." The boy swallowed hard. "The flight attendant, when I got on the plane, she laughed. People are staring. They keep whispering." His words stumbled out, tangled with sobs he could no longer hide. Around him, the whispers shifted. Some passengers turned their heads fully now, listening without shame. A woman across the aisle frowned, sympathy softening her features. A man 2 rows ahead muttered under his breath, shaking his head. But others simply stared, indifferent, as if this was just another inconvenience of air travel. On the phone, his father's breathing remained steady. "Listen to me, son," he said, his voice low but commanding. "I want you to stay calm. Keep your head high. I'll be waiting when you land." Those words cut through the boy's fear like a blade. He clung to them, holding the phone tighter against his ear. "You promise?" he whispered. "I promise," Papa replied. "And son, don't let anyone make you feel small. Not ever." The boy closed his eyes. For the first time since boarding, he felt the faint stir of safety. But the moment wasn't private anymore. The entire row had heard. Some passengers exchanged glances. Others shifted uncomfortably, as though ashamed of their silence earlier. The flight attendant, passing by with a tray, caught the last line. Her step faltered. She didn't look at him this time, not directly, but the tension in her jaw gave her away. The boy slipped the phone back into his bag, the conversation still alive in his heart. The words of his father wrapped around him like a shield, softening the sting of the whispers. But deep down, he knew something had changed. The moment his father promised to be there, the story stopped being about shame and began to turn toward justice. And when the wheels of that plane finally touched the ground, everyone on board would discover exactly who Papa was and why his arrival would change everything. The plane touched down with a jolt, wheels screeching against the runway. Passengers clapped half-heartedly, eager to leave, but for the boy, every second felt stretched. His heart pounded. His father had promised. Papa would be there. The boy clutched his backpack and waited as the aisle filled with restless travelers. The flight attendant's polished voice rang out again. "Thank you for flying with us. We hope you have a pleasant day." Pleasant. The word tasted bitter after everything. Step by step, the passengers filed out. The boy followed, small among the crowd. His palms were sweaty, his stomach tight with anticipation. He could already imagine his father's face, the strength in his voice, and then he saw him. Standing tall at the gate, Papa was impossible to miss. Broad-shouldered, dressed sharp yet simple, his presence carried weight without effort. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't even need to move. Authority radiated from him like a tide filling the room. The boy's feet quickened. "Papa!" he called, voice cracking with relief. Papa's eyes softened the moment he saw his son. He stepped forward, kneeling just enough to wrap him in a strong embrace. "I've got you," he murmured, his voice steady, protective. "You're safe now." But as he stood again, his gaze shifted, and it landed on her. The flight attendant froze mid-step, clipboard in hand. Her professional smile faltered under the weight of his stare. For the first time, she looked smaller, uneasy. The power she held in that cabin was gone. Papa didn't shout. He didn't need to. His silence spoke louder than anger. The boy clung to his father's side as Papa's eyes never left hers. Passengers passing by slowed, sensing the tension, their curiosity pulling them into the moment. The attendant's lips parted. She tried to speak, an excuse, maybe even a denial, but no words came. Papa finally broke the silence. "My son tells me you laughed at him," he said, his tone calm but edged with steel. "Is that true?" The hallway went still. The hum of rolling suitcases and chatter dulled into silence. Every ear strained for her reply. She shifted her weight, eyes darting to the ground. It wasn't like that," she stammered, her voice losing its practiced composure. Papa's expression didn't change. His presence alone was enough to pin her in place. "You thought it was harmless," he said slowly, "but to a child it wasn't. To my son it cut deep." The boy watched, wide-eyed. He had never seen his father like this. Not loud, not angry, but unshakable. The balance of power had shifted. The laughter that once echoed in his ears now seemed small, fragile, fading against his father's strength. And though the confrontation wasn't finished, everyone knew the story had turned. The question wasn't whether the flight attendant would answer. It was whether she could withstand the truth Papa was about to speak. "Do you know who I am?" Papa's voice was calm, almost quiet, but it carried like thunder through the gate area. The passengers, who had been drifting away toward baggage claim, stopped in their tracks. Heads turned, conversations hushed, all eyes locked on him. The attendant's throat tightened. She shook her head, forcing out a weak, "No, sir." Papa straightened his shoulders, his presence towering though he never raised his volume. "I am Colonel James Carter," he said, the weight of his title rolling into the air like a command. "Decorated veteran, 20 years of service, and more importantly, father to this boy." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some passengers exchanged looks of shock. Others nodded with a kind of reverence. His reputation preceded him. The name alone was nagged, known in certain circles. A leader. A man respected for his discipline, honor, and unshakable commitment to justice. The boy's eyes widened. He had always known his father was important, but hearing the title spoken aloud made him stand taller, even as he held his father's hand tightly. Papa's gaze bore into the flight attendant. "When you laughed at my son," he said, measured and steady, "you didn't just laugh at a child. You mocked his dignity. You belittled him in front of strangers, and you thought no one would hold you accountable." The attendant tried to interject, stammering, "I didn't mean—" But Papa's voice cut through, unyielding. "Intentions don't erase the damage. Words, gestures, the smallest cruelty, they all leave marks. And today, your actions carved a wound in a child who should have felt safe." The silence was suffocating. Even the airport announcements over the loudspeaker seemed distant now. Every person nearby listened, riveted, as if this moment mattered more than their connecting flights or luggage. A man in a business suit muttered, "He's right," under his breath. A young mother squeezed her daughter's hand a little tighter. The ripple of truth was spreading, seeping into everyone present. Papa stepped closer, his posture commanding but never aggressive. His authority didn't come from anger, it came from unwavering certainty. "Respect is not optional," he continued. "Not in a classroom, not on a street, and certainly not in the skies. My son deserves it. Every child deserves it." The flight attendant's face flushed crimson. Her clipboard wobbled in her grip, and for once her carefully trained smile was gone. She looked small, cornered by nothing but truth. The boy, standing beside his father, felt a swell in his chest. The shame that had weighed on him since boarding was lifting, replaced by something stronger. Pride. Pride that his papa was here. Pride that his voice mattered. And yet Papa wasn't done. His next words would not only hold the attendant accountable, but leave everyone around with a lesson they would never forget. Papa didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His calmness carried more weight than shouting ever could. He placed a steady hand on his son's shoulder, grounding him, then spoke to the attendant, but his words were meant for everyone within earshot. "Respect," he began, his tone measured, "isn't something you give only to people who look like you. It isn't earned by wealth, by clothing, or by status. Respect is the baseline of humanity. Every person deserves it, especially a child." The hallway grew quieter. The crowd leaned in unconsciously, passengers clutching their bags but unable to walk away. They weren't just spectators anymore. They were witnesses. Papa turned slightly, addressing the onlookers without ever breaking his stance. "Too many times, silence allows cruelty to grow. A laugh here, a whisper there. And when no one speaks, the wound deepens." His eyes swept the room. Several passengers dropped their gazes, guilt written on their faces. The boy watched, his tears finally drying. For the first time, he didn't feel invisible. His father's words were giving him back something the flight attendant's laugh had tried to take: his dignity. Papa's voice softened, but every syllable struck deep. "My son did not ask to be mocked today. He did not deserve to be reduced to someone's joke, and neither does any child anywhere, ever." The flight attendant's face crumpled. Her attempt at composure was gone. She opened her mouth as if to apologize, but Papa raised a hand, not to silence her harshly, but to hold the moment steady. "This isn't just about one mistake," he continued. "It's about the culture we create when we excuse cruelty. Laughter at the expense of others may seem small, until you realize it can scar a child for life." A heavy pause followed, echoing louder than any words. People shifted uncomfortably, some nodding, others visibly ashamed. The lesson was clear. What began as a cruel joke had turned into a cautionary tale. Papa knelt to his son's level, his eyes filled with warmth now. "You are worthy of respect," he said, firm enough for everyone to hear, "and no one can take that away from you." The boy's chest lifted. For the first time since boarding the plane, he breathed freely. The crowd didn't clap, but the silence spoke volumes. Everyone had been changed by what they'd witnessed. The flight attendant lowered her head, the weight of her choices finally settling on her shoulders. The boy stood a little taller now. His father's words still echoed in the air, but more importantly, they echoed inside his heart. What began as humiliation had transformed into something else: strength. Papa reached down, taking his son's small hand into his own. That simple touch said more than 1,000 speeches. It said, "You are safe. You are seen. You are valued." Passengers began to move again, quietly collecting their bags, but their eyes lingered on the pair. Some gave nods of respect. Others offered warm, apologetic smiles. No one dared whisper now. The silence was not heavy anymore. It was reverent. The boy glanced around. For the first time, he didn't feel like the target of stares. He felt like the lesson. People had watched what happened, and they had learned. His chest swelled with something he hadn't felt since stepping onto the plane: pride. He turned to his father. "Papa, thank you," he whispered. Papa squeezed his hand. "Never thank me for protecting you, son. That's my duty. But remember, one day, you'll be strong enough to protect someone else." The boy nodded slowly, letting those words sink in. He realized that the power of kindness wasn't just something his father carried. It was something he could carry too. As they walked toward the exit, the crowd parted instinctively, giving them space. The attendant remained behind, shoulders slumped, the sting of her own choices clinging to her like a shadow. She had laughed, thinking it was harmless. Now, her laughter was the very thing that unraveled her. Outside the gate, sunlight streamed through the tall airport windows. The father and son stepped into it together, their silhouettes long and unbroken. The boy looked up at his father, and for the first time he saw more than a parent. He saw a guide, a protector, and an example of what real dignity looked like. The story didn't end with shame. It ended with love. And the lesson was clear. True strength isn't measured by power or status, but by how we treat others, especially when we think no one is watching. And for everyone who had witnessed it that day, one truth would never be forgotten. Respect is the language that makes us all human.